Okay, so moving on to this other part, you practice this on Tuesday, working with isosceles, triangles, and equilateral, but just kind of going through making sure we understood that. So here's just a little reference sheet at the top to know that isosceles triangle have two congruent sides and two congruent base angles. Two congruent sides, two congruent base angles. So that means that 2 and 3 are also congruent there. Okay, so again, we know isosceles has two congruent sides, two congruent base angles.
Are you still recording? Let's see how you do this.
Okay, so really all we have to do is find if it's an isosceles triangle first, and then we can solve with it. So I know this is isosceles because I have two congruent sides there. That means that my congruent base angles, so if I follow down to the bottom of those sides, my base angles are going to be congruent. So angle J, if it's congruent to 68, is also going to be 68 degrees. And angle K, think about how I could figure that out. We talked about triangle sum, which told me that these three angles add up to 180 degrees. So I can add 68 plus 68, and then subtract that number from 180. So I'll give you a second to try that one. So we should get 136 there. Oops, when I subtract 136, I get 44 degrees. Okay, number 2, we know this is isosceles because it has two congruent sides. So I know these are two congruent base angles. So again, thinking through this process, I know that all three of these have to add up to 180 degrees. So how could I figure out what each of those angles are if they're the same? Well, I know I need to subtract from 180 there to get my remainder. So we get 74. But each one of them has to be the same. So think about how I could solve for that. I need to divide by 2. And C and E will both be the same measure in there, and you should get 37 degrees. Okay, and last one here, we see that these are two congruent base angles, so my two sides on either side of them are also going to be congruent, which means this side is also 12. So YZ is 12 centimeters, and the angle Y, how could I figure that out? We're going to add these two together and subtract from 180. So I'll give you a second to solve there. Okay, you should have gotten 26 degrees there. Okay, looking at my next one, we're now just adding in some equations, but still the same process. Those are congruent angles, which means we need to set them equal to each other. And we're just going to solve for x there. Same thing here, if I have two congruent sides, that means my congruent angles, or my angles are congruent and I set them equal. So try those. We're going to skip your number 6, doesn't look like mine, but we're going to skip your number 6. So see if you can work those two problems out and solve for x. Okay, moving on to equilateral triangles. This should be a review that all sides and all angles are congruent. You can kind of ignore that theorem there. But if my angles are congruent, then I can say that my sides are congruent. If my sides are congruent, then I can say my angles are congruent. And if I think through, all three of these have to add up to 180. And if there are three that are exactly the same, all I have to do is divide 180 by 3, and we can find the measure of each of those. So 18 divided by 3 is 6. Add our 0 back on. So this is 60, 60, 60 degrees. So let's look at number 11 there. So if I have 60 and 60, that means my last one definitely has to be 60, so we can add up to 180 there. If I have congruent angles, this means I also have congruent sides. So each one is going to be 9 feet, and my angle C is 60 degrees. Number 12, how do I know this is an equilateral triangle? I have 3 congruent sides, which means I have 3 congruent angles, all being how many degrees? 60. So equilateral are way easier to work with. And number 13. This is an equilateral triangle, which means I have 3 congruent sides, and each of my angles are 60 degrees. So does it matter which sides we pick to be equal to each other? They all have a y, so we can combine them all. And I'm just going to pick the 2 that look easiest to me. So 9y plus 1 and 11y minus 23. It doesn't matter because they're all equal to each other. Just pick any 2 you would like. And I'll give you a second to solve for y. Okay, so we should have gotten y equals 12 there, and then the setup for x, to solve for x, I know that equation or that angle has to be set equal to 60, so I'll let you solve that one.